My third life in Egypt began in silence and shadow. I was born again, not with fanfare, not with prophecy, not with the golden light of a fallen angel waiting to claim me. I came into the world as all mortals do, screaming, blind, forgotten. A simple family, a modest home on the edge of a village that had no name worth remembering. My divine origins buried deep beneath the skin of a mortal child, my celestial blood diluted by generations of forgetting. But this time, no one came. No golden-eyed king arrived at my cradle with promises and chains. No mark burned on my soul to call the faithful to my side. The world was silent in a way that felt not peaceful, but dead. And I was alone. Truly, utterly, excruciatingly alone. By the age of 7, the dreams began. Visions of golden masks and obsidian tablets, of stars that spoke in geometric tongues, languages of angle and curve, of light and shadow, of truths that could not be translated into the clumsy poetry of human speech, of a face I almost recognized, watching me from behind a veil of fire. They were not memories. Memories would have been comforting. These were hauntings. I awoke screaming into the quiet night, my small hands clutching at a reality that felt thin as papyrus, fragile as glass. I would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the walls to peel back and reveal the truth, the vast, terrible machinery of existence that I could feel humming just beneath the surface of the ordinary. My family's comforting words soon curdled into fearful whispers. He sees things. He speaks to empty air. There's something wrong with that child. They called it madness. I began to believe them. At 14, their fear finally outweighed their love. I remember the morning they sent me away. My mother's eyes, red from weeping, would not meet mine. My father's jaw, set like stone, spoke the words that severed the last thread of my humanity. You cannot stay here. Not anger, not cruelty, fear. The deep, primal terror of a family confronted with something they could not name, could not fix, could not pray away. I became a creature of the alleys, a scavenger, a ghost haunting the edges of a world that had no place for me. I survived on scraps, bread crust hardened by sun, water from channels where the livestock drank, the charity of those who pitied the wild-eyed boy with the hollow cheeks and the terrible stillness that came over him at night. But the true hunger was not in my stomach. It was in my soul. The veil between worlds, that barrier that protected mortal minds from the screaming chaos of the unseen, had for most people been a solid wall. For me, it had become a tattered curtain. I saw what others could not. Shadows that breathed, whispers that took form, shapes that moved at the corner of vision and vanished when I turned. Ancient entities, older than Egypt, older than the fallen angels, older than the stars themselves, the beings the old texts would one day call jinn. Creatures of smokeless fire and hungry curiosity, neither good nor evil but other. They watched me with hollow interest. I could feel their gazes like fingers tracing my spine. They were drawn to the flickering divine light trapped within my broken human shell, that ember of Nephilim blood, that echo of Atlantis, that thing that made me different. They did not fear me. They did not worship me. They waited. And I knew them, not by name, not by history, but by a deeper, older recognition. The way a lamb knows the wolf. The way a dreamer knows the thing crouched at the foot of the bed. That knowing was a terror all its own. By 17, the weight of the unseen world was too much to bear. The constant siege upon my senses. The relentless loneliness of being the only one who saw. The crushing certainty that I was a monstrous error, a soul that had slipped through the cracks of creation and should never have been born at all. I stood on the edge of the Nile, watching the black water swallow the stars. And I thought, if I step in, will it end? Not the pain, not the fear, the seeing, the knowing, the terrible, beautiful, unbearable awareness that had marked me since birth. The current would take me. The darkness would close over my head. And perhaps, the veil would finally close. On a night that smelled of dust and despair, I resolved to end the torment, to sever a thread that seemed irrevocably tangled, to close a story that never should have been written. And then, as the darkness within me reached its deepest pitch, as my foot hovered over the water's edge, as the jinn gathered in the shadows to watch the divine spark gutter and die. She came. She emerged from the shimmering heat of the desert not as a woman, but as a vision. The air itself seemed to bend around her, unable to decide whether to embrace her or kneel. A silhouette crowned in gold, not the harsh gold of Samael's tyranny, but something softer, something older, something that had been polished by the hands of forgotten moons. Her face was hidden behind the exquisite mask of a cat, lapis and obsidian, silver and shadow, the eyes cut with such precision that they seemed to watch from angles that should not have existed. A goddess walking among the dust and the forgotten. Royalty, power, divine purpose made flesh. My ragged breath caught in my throat. The scavenger boy who had slept in alleys, who had eaten scraps, who had been cast out like a diseased animal. He knew her. The knowledge was not thought. It was a primal ache in my soul, a wound that had never healed because it had never been named, a memory from a life I could not remember, rising like a drowning man to the surface. She stood before me, this apparition of grace amidst my ruin, and her voice, oh, her voice, was like cool water on a burning wound, like rain on cracked earth, like the first word a deaf child hears after a lifetime of silence. Do you remember who you are? The question was so vast it shattered the last of my composure. I was a boy who spoke to shadows, a wretch who saw monsters in the midday sun, a creature so broken that his own mother had turned away rather than meet his eyes. And now this goddess, stood before me asking for a name I had never possessed. I don't even know what I am, I whispered. The confession tore from a place of raw, hopeless shame, a wound that had been festering since my first memory, since my first dream, since the first time I had seen something that should not be seen and realized that I would never, ever be normal. I looked up at her. My eyes, those wild, haunted eyes that had made children cross to the other side of the street, begged for an answer I had stopped hoping for years ago. Am I human? Her laughter was not unkind, but it was ancient, a sound that held the echoes of stars and forgotten worlds, the rustle of wings that had fallen from heaven, the whisper of waves that had drowned Atlantis. It was the answer to a question I had not known how to ask, a reassurance that came not in words, but in timbre. She simply extended her hand. Come with me. We traveled to Memphis, the beating heart of the empire I had helped conceive in another lifetime, though I did not know it then. I walked beside her through streets that felt familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. The scent of incense, the weight of stone, the hum of something vast and sleeping beneath my feet. She led me past towering statues, gods with the faces of beasts, kings with the eyes of eternity, and through sun-drenched courtyards where priests stopped mid-prayer to stare. A scavenger, filthy and wild, walking beside a goddess as though he belonged there. Into the cool, silent depths of a temple that hummed with latent power. The air changed as we descended, grew heavy, grew old. The shadows here were not the shadows of absence, but the shadows of presence, things that had been waiting, patient as stone, for a key they had not seen in centuries. There, upon an altar of black basalt, smooth as glass, dark as the space between stars, rested a tablet of shimmering green stone. Its surface was alive with carved sigils that seemed to writhe in the dim light. They moved when I looked away. They watched when I looked back. I knew them. I had carved them, in a language that had died before Egypt was born. Without a word, she took my hand, the dirty, trembling hand of a scavenger, the hand that had scraped for bread in filth, the hand that had nearly ended its own story on the banks of the Nile. And with a ritual blade, curve of obsidian, edge of moonlight, she drew a single drop of blood. The blood fell upon the stone, and the glyphs ignited. Emerald fire, bright as a sun, cold as a tomb, ancient as the first thought ever thought, exploded from the tablet. The light did not illuminate the chamber. It consumed it. Stone walls vanished. Ceilings dissolved. The world became nothing but green fire and truth. She began to chant. The words were not spoken. They were remembered. Each syllable resonated in the very core of my being, striking chords I had not known I possessed. The air thickened, charged with the ozone scent of lightning and creation, with a copper taste of blood, with the sweetness of a forgiveness I had never earned. The green light from the tablet lanced into me, not as fire, as water, as revelation, a searing torrent of truth that burned away the lies, the fear, the 17 years of forgotten agony. It stripped the veil from my eyes one by one, first the veil of the world, then the veil of the self, then the veil of death itself. And I saw. It was not a remembering. Remembering implies that something had been forgotten. This was an awakening. The scavenger boy dissolved into mist. The alleyways of Memphis faded like a dream upon waking. The hunger, the loneliness, the madness, all of it, was not erased, but transfigured, transformed from curse to context, from wound to wisdom. I drew a breath, and it was my first true breath in a lifetime. My spine straightened, not with arrogance, but with alignment. My shoulders settled into a posture they had known since before this world was named. My eyes, once wild with confusion, now saw with the clarity of ages. The jinn that had haunted my steps did not flee, they bowed. The shadows that had whispered did not fall silent. They sang. I looked at the goddess who had pulled me from the abyss, and I finally saw past the mask. I was Dastan, prince of Atlantis, son of Elika, the light that had shone beneath the waves, son of Ahriman, the shadow behind creation's veil, nephew to Marduk and Enki, heir to a legacy that had drowned when the world was young. And she, standing before me with her cat mask glinting in the dying emerald light, her emerald eyes, those eyes, brimming with tears she would never admit to shedding. She was Aradia, daughter of Samael, sister to Lu, the one who had loved me across the turning of the world, the one who had found me when I had forgotten myself, the one who had pulled me from the water's edge and reminded me that I was not a monster, not a mistake, not a madman, but a king, my constant, my redemption, the anchor to my soul across the turning of the world. I reached for her hand, not the trembling hand of a scavenger, but the steady hand of a prince who had finally come home. And for the first time in 17 years, I remembered how to smile. The memories crashed over me not as fragments, not as the slow, gentle return of something lost. They came as a tidal wave. Centuries of lives, wars fought in shadows and starlight, divine purpose etched into bones that had been dust for generations. I was Dastan again, prince of Atlantis, son of light and shadow, keeper of secrets that had drowned with a continent. But I was also the scavenger boy who had slept in alleys. I was also Thoth, scribe of the divine. I was also the monster who had clawed at the bars of his own soul, whole and shattered all at once. The world swam back into focus. The temple, the altar, the green tablet still cooling on its black basalt throne, and Aradia, Bastet, watching me with eyes that had seen too much and loved me anyway. My first coherent thought, sharp and urgent as a blade, was for the architect of it all. Where is Samael? Aradia's gaze was heavy with a history I had missed. Not days, not months, years. He is gone, she said. Her voice was low, the voice of someone who had learned to speak softly because shouting changed nothing. He used the Anunnaki technology within the pyramid. He journeyed into hell. The word meant little to me then. A concept, a threat from her celestial stories, a place in the geography of theology, not a destination one could reach. My mind, still reeling from my own awakening, could not grasp it. Hell was for the damned, the fallen, the dead, not for a fallen archangel who had already defied heaven itself. But something in her tone told me not to ask further. Not yet. I needed to see something tangible, a legacy I could understand, a monument to the purpose that had driven me across lifetimes. Show me the pyramid, I asked. Then, remembering, and your sister, Lu? Where is she? Lu rules in his stead, Aradia explained. A shadow crossed her face, not grief, but something heavier. Responsibility. She holds Memphis together while the king walks among devils. She stepped closer, her emerald eyes searching mine. "We will see the monument. But you cannot walk openly as you are. The form of Thoth is known," she continued. "His return would raise too many questions for which we have no answers. Questions that could undo everything we have built." I understood. The people knew Thoth, the ibis-masked god, the scribe of Ra, the keeper of wisdom. But Thoth had died. His body had been buried. His soul had been witnessed departing by priests who had recorded his passing in temple scrolls. A resurrection would be a miracle, or crisis. "My father left instructions," Aradius said. "In his absence, you are to stand beside me. The people need a ruler, a face of power, a presence that bridges the divine and the mortal." Her hand found mine. Her fingers were warm, steady, certain. "You will be Ptah." The name settled over me like a cloak being fitted to shoulders that had forgotten their own shape. God of craftsmen, of creation, the divine sculptor who forged the world from thought and word. She was not asking. She was naming. "You will be the maker, the foundation, and as my partner, as the one who stands at my right hand and shares my throne, you will have a claim to power that none can challenge." It was a role, a mask, another face to wear across the turning of the world. I agreed, a pawn stepping back onto the celestial board, unaware of how deep the game truly went. We traveled to the desert plateau. The sun was setting or rising. I could no longer tell the difference, and the sky bled orange and violet across the horizon. The Nile glittered in the distance, a serpent of silver coiling through the green ribbon of civilization. And there, rising from the golden sand like teeth torn from the jaw of a sleeping god, the pyramids. The sight stole the breath from my lungs. In the centuries since my death, since I had laid down my stylus and closed my eyes for the last time, they had not merely finished the Great Pyramid. They had built another. Two colossal structures pierced the heavens, siblings in stone, their peaks kissing the belly of the sky. Shadows stretched from their bases like roots reaching into the underworld. The first, our original design, the machine I had translated from Enki's celestial texts, stood silent, dormant. Its stones were dark, almost hungry, as though the structure itself was holding its breath. The second was slightly smaller, and it hummed. A low, pervasive energy vibrated through the ground, through my bones, through my teeth. It was not sound. It was presence, the weight of something waking from a very long sleep. "Why does the Great One sleep?" I asked, my voice hushed. "The energy required is immense," Aradia replied. Her eyes were fixed on the silent giant, the first pyramid, the original, the key we had built but never turned. "We have not yet harnessed enough power to wake the gateway." As she spoke, the air before the smaller pyramid began to shimmer. Not the shimmer of heat rising from sun-baked stone. Not the shimmer of tears in weary eyes. This was something else, something wrong. The space folded. The light bent around a point that had no business existing in this world. Then the fabric of reality tore. A wound of brilliant, violent light split the air before us, edges ragged as torn flesh, the center blazing with colors that had no names because no human tongue had ever needed to speak them. The portal was stable, roaring, a soundless scream of matter being unmade and remade in the same terrible instant. And from its heart, a figure emerged, silhouetted against impossible light. Wings folded like a question mark, a presence so dense that the very sand beneath my feet seemed to cower. They had arrived. The portal pulsed once, twice, and then it was not one figure, but three. Shadows within shadows, light within light. They stepped from the tear in the world as though they had simply been walking down a hallway and chosen this door. The air before the smaller pyramid tore open, not like a curtain parted by a gentle hand, not like a door swinging on well-oiled hinges. This was a scream, silent, terrible, absolute, the sound of reality being forced to its knees and commanded to break. The fabric of the world folded back upon itself, layers of existence peeled apart like the skin of some celestial fruit, and from the wound poured light. Not the golden light of Samael's sun, not the emerald fire of Aradia's awakening. This was the light of elsewhere, the color of spaces between spaces, the phosphorescence of the void where even the angels feared to tread. From that searing portal, Azrael was the first to step through. His presence was a void, not darkness. Darkness is something, a presence of its own. This was absence, a pocket of absolute silence that swallowed the very sound of the wind, that hushed the whispers of the temple priests, that made the dust itself forget how to fall. He passed us without a glance, a shadow moving through lesser shadows, his expressionless gaze fixed on some distant point only he could see. The scythe hung at his back like a question no one dared answer. He simply waited, a patient sentinel for what was to come. The angel of death, the last silence, the one who had stood beside Samael when the heavens burned and had never once asked why. Then Samael emerged. The portal flickered as he crossed its threshold, as though even that tear in reality hesitated to release him. His golden armor caught the Egyptian sun and twisted it, made it darker, richer, more dangerous. The crook and flail hung at his sides like sleeping serpents, and his eyes, those eyes, burned with the weight of centuries. His gaze found us, Aradia, Lou, me, and for a fleeting moment, so brief I might have imagined it, a genuine light of triumph flickered within him. Not the cold satisfaction of a conqueror, something warmer, something almost human. A king returned to his kingdom. A father returned to his daughters. A brother returned to the only alliance that had ever mattered. But the warmth vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the hard edge of a general who had seen too many battles to forget that war was hungry. "We are at war," he stated. His voice cut through the desert stillness like a blade through silk. No preamble, no comfort, just truth. The legions of hell and the infernal devils themselves now move against us. The words hung in the air, heavy as lead, cold as the space between stars. "And we require gold." "Gold?" I asked, perplexed. I had thought, foolishly, perhaps, that he meant tribute, bribes for infernal kings, adornment for celestial weapons, the trappings of power rather than power itself. "For survival," he corrected. His tone left no room for doubt, no room for hope, only the flat, unyielding certainty of someone who had learned the hard way that the universe did not give. "It is a metal that pierces more than flesh." He stepped closer, and I saw something in his golden eyes that I had never seen before. Fear. Not for himself, for what was coming. It can wound angels, slay devils, even when they walk the astral realms. Untouchable by steel, invincible to sorcery, gold finds them. Gold burns them. He turned to look at the great pyramid rising against the horizon, its unfinished peak still waiting for the stones that would never come. "We will forge weapons of it. Armies will be equipped for a war that spans dimensions, that spans realms. The material and the immaterial, the living and the dead, the fallen and the damned." No sooner had he spoken than the portal pulsed. The light within it deepened, darkened, thickened, and a third figure emerged. This was no silent reaper, patient as the grave. This was no fallen king, burdened by a crown he had stolen from heaven itself. This was a warrior, an angelic being radiating a dark, predatory energy that made the air taste of blood and thunder. His body was a tapestry of celestial scars, cross-hatched lines of silver and shadow, each one a story, each one a victory. He had fought wars before the first star was lit. He had killed things that had no names because no one had survived to name them. And upon his shoulders rested not one head, but three. They shifted as I watched, melting from one form to the next, never settling, never still. A man with a stern face and eyes that had judged empires. A goat with horns of obsidian and eyes of smoldering coal. The beast that lurked beneath every throne. And a jackal, snarling, dripping with primal menace, its jaws open as though to swallow the sky itself. The jackal's eyes locked onto me, and in them I saw a bottomless hunger, not for my flesh, not for my blood, for my chaos. Samael gestured for the terrifying entity to follow, his voice calm as still water. "Come, brother, we have strategies to devise." "Brother," as the being moved past, his three heads twisting, watching, Evaluating, I turned to Aradia. My voice was low, almost a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might draw that hungry gaze back to me. What is he? Her answer came soft, laden with caution, with a weight of knowledge she had hoped never to share. That is the arch-cherubim, Azazel. The name fell from her lips like a stone dropped into deep water. Once, he was counted among the greatest warriors in all the heavens. He stood with my father in the rebellion. He was the first through the breach, the last to retreat, the only one the heavenly host still speaks of in whispers. She watched the trio walk toward the palace, Samael, Azrael, and this new terror, the shadows merging into something larger than any of them alone. Hey, you will know him as Set, god of chaos, the desert, the untamed forces that defy order, the murderer of his own brother, the enemy of everything that grows. Her voice dropped lower still. But he does not dwell with us. I turned to look at her. He rules another land, far to the north, a place the people call Alada. A pause. There, they do not know his chaos. They do not see the jackal's hunger or the goat's cunning. They have given him a different face, a throne, a crown, a domain of lightning and law. Her emerald eyes met mine, and I saw something there I had never seen before. Uncertainty. They worship him as their chief deity, the king of their gods. She spoke the name like a curse and a prayer in the same breath. They call him Zeus. The desert wind picked up, carrying dust and the distant sound of thunder from a cloudless sky. And somewhere, far to the north, the king of the Greek gods smiled, and his three faces smiled with him. And so the great mining began. Humanity, in its devotion, or perhaps its subjugation, bent its back to the earth. Thousands of hands tore into the ancient womb of the world, extracting the precious gold that would arm celestial beings for a war beyond their comprehension. They did not know what they dug for. They did not know the weapons their labor would forge, or the devils those weapons would slay. They only knew that Ra had commanded it, and Ra was the sun. The sun did not answer questions. Samael, Azrael, and the fearsome Azazel departed for the distant shores of Alada, that wild, northern land where mountains scraped the sky and the sea was the color of wine and blood. They sought an audience with the reclusive Grigory, the watchers who had long turned their eyes from the affairs of heaven and hell. Those ancient beings, bound to the earth since before the flood, had made themselves scarce since the rebellion. They neither fought nor fled. They simply watched. Now Samuel would force them to choose. Lu joined their grim embassy. Her reasons were her own, a mystery she carried like a blade beneath her cloak. She did not say goodbye. She only looked at Aradia, at me, at the throne she was leaving behind, and then she stepped through the portal without a backward glance. She left the twin crowns of Egypt upon mine and Aradia's heads. As Ptah, divine craftsman, maker of worlds, the god who had spoken creation into being with a word, I sat upon the throne bestowed by the sun god Ra. The weight of the crown was a familiar burden, though its shape was new. Beside me sat Bastet, Aradia, my partner in the eyes of the empire, the cat-eyed goddess who had pulled me from the river's edge and reminded me of my name. Our duty was simple in appearance: oversee the endless excavation, maintain the faith of a people who dug for a god's war, receive their offerings, hear their petitions, bless their marriages and their tombs. But in the silent hours, when the priests had gone to their chambers and the miners had laid down their tools, our true work unfolded. Aradia immersed herself in the arcane. Her mind, already sharp as obsidian, devoured every scrap of witchcraft and primordial magic she could find. She studied the old texts, the forbidden scrolls, the whispered traditions that had survived from ages before Egypt drew its first breath. She constantly questioned me about the old ways, the power of my family, the wisdom of the dragons, the lost arts of Atlantis. She wanted to know, and I painted for her visions of a world so vibrant, so alive, that our current reality seemed a pale echo. I showed her Nibiru's golden spires and the dragons who slept in the heart of its sun. I showed her Atlantis as it had been before the waves took it, streets of pearl, towers of light, my mother's laughter echoing through halls that had drowned 1,000 years ago. One day, I promised her, "You will meet them." While she studied magic, I studied the new cosmos taking shape around us. I learned the hierarchies of hell, its circles and princes, its legions and its laws. I learned the fractured choirs of angels, those who had fallen, those who had stayed, and those who had simply wandered off when no one was looking. I learned the stark geography of heaven and the abyss, the territories claimed and contested, the wars that had never ended but only paused to catch their breath. I sought to understand the board upon which we were now played. Years flowed like the Nile toward the sea, slow at first, then faster, always faster, until the decades blurred into centuries and the centuries into a single, aching breath. Age found us, as it finds all mortal vessels. The lines on Aradia's face deepened into maps of a life well lived. The fire in my cursed veins burned lower, softer, older. Samael returned to reclaim his throne mere seasons before Aradia flew, and I breathed our last. He stepped through the portal from Alado with new alliances forged and new enemies made. But his triumph was shadowed by the knowledge of what he had returned to lose. Our reign ended not in battle, not in glory, not in the screaming of swords or the roaring of gods. It ended in the quiet sigh of time, the soft closing of a door that had been open for just a little too long. As my soul loosened its grip on the world, as the throne of Ptah faded and the twin crowns tumbled from my brow, Zeren was there, a familiar shade in the twilight. The chains of eternity clinking softly, the hollow sockets of his eyes holding all the patience of the grave. So, his voice echoed, a dry rustle in the stillness. This time, no curse, no mask, no thoth. He tilted his skull, considering me with that eerie, eternal amusement. The prince of fallen Atlantis never ruled his own city. Yet this rebel angel gave you an empire to command. A rattling chuckle. An interesting game you play. His hollow gaze seemed to pierce through all my lives at once, through the scribe and the king, through the monster and the man, through every mask I had ever worn and every name I had ever answered to. Sometimes you are Thoth, the scribe from the depths. Sometimes Ptah, the king from the sun. He leaned closer. And what of the princess, the daughter of your jailer? The air grew cold. Have you forgotten your own cousin, Norma? And what was done? The name. It struck me like a blade twisting in a wound that had never healed, a wound I had buried so deep, covered with so many lifetimes of forgetting, that I had almost believed it gone. Norma, the name of my cousin, the daughter of my father's brother almost, the girl who had laughed with me in the gardens of Atlantis before the waves came. How could I forget? My whisper was barely a breath, thin as smoke, fragile as glass. The memory rose, ashen loss, salt water, and screaming, a hand slipping from mine as the world ended. Zeren said nothing. He did not need to. Without another word, his grasp closed around my spirit, gentle as a father's hand, final as a tomb seal, and he drew me once more into the cycle. The wheel turned. The darkness folded around me like a mother's arms. And behind me, the sands of Egypt shifted in the wind. The pyramids stood silent against the stars. The thrones sat empty. The empire that had been mine, Ptah's, waited for a king who would not return for 1,000 years. But the game? The game was never finished. It had only just begun to remember my name.